Thank you for giving me this opportunity. There's a story in the Senate cloakroom out in Washington, D.C. about one of my colleagues from an eastern state who went to a town meeting. And at the town meeting, he opened it to questions, and a lady stood up and said, Senator, I'm having a lot of trouble with my trash pickup. They're knocking over the garbage cans, and the dogs are out there going through the trash. There's a big mess on the curbside every morning. And the senator said, excuse me, ma'am, but I'm a United States senator. You've got to talk to your alderman. And she said, I didn't want to start that high. So we put all this in context of the service of government. I represent 12.5 million people, but Burton Natarus, as alderman of the 42nd Ward, with a smaller constituency in number, is much closer in terms of their needs. And if you look at his history, his life history as well as his public history, you can understand why he's so good at this. He was a paratrooper, you know, and he's parachuted into some pretty ticklish situations right here in the 42nd Ward. And he's found ways to deal with competing interests for over 30 years here in this ward, trying to make certain that he balances the need for growth, that he realizes, as we all do, the 42nd Ward is such a critical part of the success of the city of Chicago, and that he shows that he not only has a good mind, but a good heart too. And if you look at his list of accomplishments, it's so long over these years, what he's been able to do. Things he's done back in the days when the ward boundaries might have been a little different, dealing with Cabrini Green and some of the challenges, Walter Payton High School, working with Deborah Place, and Senior McDermott over at Haymarket House, making certain that there's green space, trying to keep the residents happy when you have all the world coming in to celebrate in your ward and you don't want them to screw up the lifestyle of regular folks who are living in that area. It's quite a balancing act, and he's been extraordinarily gifted and talented at achieving it. And he's always great newsprint. I think the news media just loves Bert because he's reached that point in his public career where he'll almost say anything, and they'll print it every time. And we follow these, the wit and wisdom of Burton Natarus because it is certainly worth the price of the paper every morning. Before I bring him on, I want to tell you a story about what happened to me when I took a trip out to California. And I went to the headquarters of Disney. And I went in there as a senator and met the CEO of Disney. This is a few years back. And I said to him, well, I'm from Illinois and the city of Chicago, and don't you all have something downtown, Chicago? Oh, yeah. He said, it was an interesting experience, Senator. He said, we took our top California law firm that represents Disney all over the world, and we said we're going into Chicago to talk about the future of the Chicago theater. And we didn't know quite what law firm to deal with in Chicago. And so we called ahead to some of our friends and contacts there, and we said to them, which firm should we contact to make certain that we can get in to see Mayor Daley? And people came back to him and said, forget that. Find the firm you can contact to make certain that you can get in to see Burton Natarus. Tells you a lot, doesn't it, about what this man means to the city of Chicago, what the 42nd Ward means to all of us. He's a great public servant for over 3 decades, a Badger from the University of Wisconsin, Burton Natarus.
Takes a little time to adjust my biblical quotations. First of all, I want you to know, Senator, that I am local, and I believe in the Tip O'Neill philosophy, and to make certain that you're local, I've got something here to give you that'll watch you each day. I'm very serious about being local. I think, quite frankly, the key to some of my success is my political rivals know that I am not politically ambitious. It was always my purpose to stay local because we raised a family, my former wife and I, may she rest in peace, and I wanted to stay on the local scene, and I was very, very lucky to arrive in an area that really had a great deal of challenge to it, and so I truly, truly am local, and I think the key to government is being local. I also think the key to the city of Chicago in terms of making it work is we happen to have 50 reasonably sized political districts, and Mayor Daley is very fortunately having 50 janitors to help him keep the city in good shape. And I think the mayor realizes that. And despite the fact that there are some newspaper people who would like to reduce our size, that would be, to me, political folly. I spent the whole weekend in trying to figure out what really should I be talking about today and what shouldn't I be talking about in terms of I might get myself into political trouble. In order to do that, I had a very boring 48 minutes of listening to my ad lib from last year. Last year I had a 48-minute ad lib. I was told by my friends it better not run 48 minutes today. And I'll try very hard not to get into that time frame. And I think I covered an awful lot of ground with regard to the development. And I am very, very much concerned about development. I have spent a great deal of my time traveling to all of the cities imaginable, either in my car or whatever have you, and I visited them all. And the best example that I can give on how not to run a city, and it's really a good example, you ought to go there, is Cleveland. Cleveland is just a beautiful place to visit in terms of sociology and political acumen and development. You go down to downtown, and I know this is a little bit of a repeat from last year, but it's worth repeating. You go to downtown Cleveland and you see about a 6-block area near the Renaissance Hotel, and that's your downtown. And you walk a few steps and there are some nifty little saloons along the river, and the beer isn't as good as Chicago. And then you can go and travel in another direction. You see some of the stadiums. And then the most interesting place is the Rock and Roll Museum, and you can pick up some of the folk sing. My favorite folk singer is Roy Orbison, so I bought all of his tapes. And that's about it. And then if you go beyond the 6-month radius, you see bombed out Berlin. It is just absolutely terrible. They put so many zoning restrictions in many, many years ago that nobody wanted to come in and build. And you know everybody hates developers. The neighbors hate developers. They hate them, they hate every one of the developers. They hate their guts. In fact, the developers have to either wear a raincoat when they're walking down the street or a steel helmet in my neighborhood because they may be bombed out. But the point of the matter is, I ask you again, where do you get the financing and where do you get the money in a capitalistic system if it not be for the developers? And the developers have to be policed. Well, they over-policed everybody in Cleveland, and the only thing they have going for them right now, they have an excellent hospital, the Cleveland Hospital. If you unfortunately become ill, it's on a level of Mayo and Chicago, and of course Northwestern, which is the greatest hospital in the world since Ralph Weber is sitting here. Then they took us on a tour, and David Bauman would appreciate this. They took us on a tour to see architecture, and they took us out to the suburbs in Shaker Heights on a bus. And that is not, it seems to me, what we need for Chicago. We are very, very fortunate, whether some people like it or not, to have a tremendous high-rise core. I mean, just look at it. Rent a car if you don't rent a car, drive a car, come in on the train. Look at the horizon that we have with these tall spires. And every one of them really presents to you a different picture. Now, I'm not saying to you that we should have tall spires all over the city. That would be really negative. It would not take into account the brownstones. Would not take into account all of the buildings that we're trying to preserve. But this downtown area is so very, very important that we have passed last year a central area plan, and now we have passed a new zoning ordinance in which we are designating different symbols for this central core so that we can maintain a planning and zoning control over them. Now, I have outside placed in a box, there's only 100. Those of you who are interested in having as your own possession a disc which has a zoning ordinance contained on it, you can put it in the VCR and see the zoning ordinance every day, especially the neighborhood groups and or the business people, and it's available to you, as well as a report that's issued by the Manhattan Institute in New York to clearly indicate why New York has failed. Now, I'd like to talk a little bit about New York. Everybody says to me, well, we don't want Chicago to become New York. It's not going to, believe me. We're not even close. If you would like to know why New York is not able to enhance itself in terms of real estate economically, there are two reasons, and some of the neighborhood groups aren't going to like this, but I have to tell the truth because I was there, I talked to members of the city council, I talked to the mayor, and the reason is twofold. Number one, they have a zoning ordinance that's too strict, and number two, they went through a period of reform, and in the period of reform, of course, everybody in New York hates the politicians, just like everybody hates the politicians in this town. They gave official standing to the neighborhood groups to vote, just like a city council, on the zoning matters. And as a result, all of the groups fight with each other, and they cannot get anything done at all. And so I think we have in Chicago a very, very healthy medial standard of how to get things done. Now, Daniel Moynihan was quoted in that Manhattan Institute report, in which he says that the minute any city stops development and stops building, it begins to die, and that's what's been happening in New York. You can't build, you can't do anything. Now, Brooklyn was very interesting. Brooklyn did not go along or did not join the Confederation in terms of acceptance of the New York zoning ordinance. Brooklyn did just the exact opposite. And as a result, you find in Brooklyn development occurring in a very, very meaningful, very, very productive way, not only in terms of zoning, development, what have you, but in terms of preservation. If you go to Brooklyn and you look and you go along the shore as the river enters New York Harbor, you'll find some of the most interesting samples of architecture that you've ever seen. Now we have this new zoning ordinance, and now it seems to me is the time, if we're going to lower density and take care of those density needs, and we're doing just that. I have filed and I have already passed 27 zoning ordinances which will take various pieces of property, particularly around Rush Street and particularly around the west and east River North areas, and where we found and we investigated that people were not interested in developing or didn't have any plans, we downzoned them one zoning category. Now that is to the chagrin of many, many people, especially who own the land, but my feeling about it was this, and I'm getting ready to duck in terms of the tomatoes. My feeling about it was this: if you didn't have any plans and you weren't ready to file, then you were sitting on the land which you're entitled to do and waiting for the evaluation to go up. And I don't think government has a responsibility of protecting that. And the reason I don't think government has the responsibility of protecting that is this: if 5 years from now you do have a good plan. There's no reason you can't come in for a zoning change. It'll be a little more difficult, but you can come in. You can get an amendment. Maybe you have a high-rise spire that, will make Mies van der Rohe run into the closet. Who knows? And that can always be taken care of in terms of governmental action. The other facet of it is this: if you had a large project, no matter what the zoning was, you would have to have a plan development anyhow. So if you're having a plan development, whether you had a lower zoning category or not, you would still have to go and have it approved by the Chicago Plan Commission and the City Council. So I didn't feel that was hurting anybody in the long run. And then there was a particular street that we were interested in, and that was the only street that we took and we lowered 2 zoning categories, and that was Oak Street. I don't think anybody in this room would sit by and object to our preventing high-rise development on Oak Street. Maybe there are. I don't know. Now, I don't know if he's in the room. I had a long discussion with the owner of the Esquire Theater about that. And we had a discussion, and as far as I know, the discussion went well. I don't know if it's because I made a face or what, but it went well. So that's where we are today. Now, there are a number of people who want to ask me questions about the Fourth Presbyterian Church, and don't do it. I'm not going to answer anything about Fourth Presbyterian Church for the simple reason it wouldn't be proper for me to do so. First of all, I'm a member of the Plan Commission. Secondly, I am the alderman of the ward, and we are looking at it. We are looking at it. I have to say to you that there are a number of letters and a number of petitions on both sides, and it's going to probably be the toughest development project that we've ever decided, and I don't know which way we're going to go or what we're going to do, but it's going to take so many, many hours of discussion, and I don't look forward to anything happening with regard to any decision-making until next year. Now, I'd like to take this opportunity to talk about something that is really dear to my heart, and that's 2 topics. I really and truly wish this war were over. I really do. I don't know what we're going to do about this. I do it for 2 reasons. Number one, I just abhor the bloodshed. I hate to see our men and women dying over there, but we're there and we have to do something about it, and we have to do it in a meaningful way, otherwise it's going to hit us in the back later. And both candidates have said that they're going to do something about it, and you'll have to decide, you'll have to decide how you're going to go in November. But I would like the war to be over for an altogether different reason, too. We've got to get some economic aid to local government. We really do. We've got to get some funding from the feds and from the state. The state needs it from the feds because, the federal government takes such a whopping chunk out of our economic wherewithal in terms of income tax. And we've got to get some of that back. Now, the only thing that we have going for us in this city is a tax that everybody hates. Everybody hates it. I can tell they hate it because they're beginning to walk out of the room. And that's the property. That's fun. Please, I always make jokes. The thing is, the property tax, people hate the property tax for several reasons. Number one, the seniors are hit very hard because they paid off their mortgage on their home and they're taxed on their home. Corporations don't like it because they have to pay it. The corporate income tax is paid by very, very few corporations. They're able to offset it with various expenses and deductions and depreciation, what have you. But everybody has to pay the property tax in some form or other. But that's the only tax that government has on a local level that we can keep. Now, the rest of our taxing program goes down to Springfield, and you know that the farmers under our Constitution have more power than the city folks. That's the way Thomas Jefferson set it up. But I'm not worried about that, the fact that they only send us $1 back out of 3, something like that. All our motor fuel tax, sales tax, state income tax goes on to the legislature, and they cut it up, and maybe we get some of it back. But when you pay your property taxes to Mrs. Pappas, she then, after a certain period of time, issues a check to the city, issues a check to the Board of Education, issues a check to the Park District, issues a check to the Reclamation District. And so we get the money, and we need the money because most of the property tax is used to pay for the police and the fire and the sanitation people. And we need it very, very badly. We're approaching our budget, and you've read the newspapers. Some of what the newspapers say is true. The only I hope there are not any reporters in the room. The only political reporter in the history of Illinois that ever knew how to read the budget was Harry Golden Jr. He was an absolute pro at it, and he always gave very, very accurate reporting. The rest of it is done on the basis of whisper. But we're not doing so hot. We're not doing too well. And I have a lot of fears. Now, going too long, huh? No, you're fine. You know, we passed a city council resolution putting a lid, 7% lid on homes, and it went down to the legislature and it passed. So we've got the 7% lid on evaluations. But then what happens when it comes to the levy? In other words, if everybody is limited to 7%, which is wonderful, everybody likes it, you know, then what happens to our base? And if the base collapses or the base shrinks, then how are we going to raise the base? We'll have to raise taxes. And that's my biggest fear. I went through this in '85, by the way. I went through this in '85. Was the last time we really raised the levy during the Washington administration. And I was the one that was tabbed, thank you, Dick Mill. I was tabbed as the swing vote. And I don't mind telling you, I really came close to losing. It was a real tough fight. I had 8 people running against me on a tax issue. Now, with all due respect to the Congress of the United States, they're smart. Before the election, what they do is they have a tax cut. You know, then they don't have to worry about it. Then if they have to raise taxes, they do it after the election. Now, I'm not being critical of that. I think it's very, very smart. But we're coming up to a budget period now in November and December, and we really have to watch it. Now, many people say to us, well, let's cut. Well, that's fine. It's very good. But then if your garbage isn't picked up, I mean, then what do? Or don't have enough policemen. We don't have enough policemen in this ward the way it is. You want to know why we have traffic problems? We have traffic problems on Michigan Avenue because we used to have a policeman standing there at every single intersection. I knew one officer was there for 30 years at Chicago and Michigan. That was his police station. That's where he directed traffic. And the main cause of traffic today are 2 things, not necessarily high rises. The main cause of traffic problems today is, number 1, people going into the intersection on the yellow and sitting there, and number 2, the double parkers. If we can get rid of those 2 things, we may be well on our road. Now, how do we solve all of these traffic problems and these congestion problems? I was very fortunate. I served on a committee a few months ago talking about regional planning. And I'm absolutely convinced that the key to our survival in the city area, not only in Chicago, but in the suburbs, is mass transportation. We've got And I'm very upset about the fact that all of a sudden we're going to build another toll road. I'm very upset about the fact that already we're going to start increasing the tolls on 294. That's wonderful. You know what will happen? All the interstate trucks will come down to Dan Ryan. And we'll get all, during the middle of the night, you can stand on the bridge and you'll count the trucks. And they'll be coming down to Dan Ryan all hours of the day, and they won't go to 294 because they increased the rates. And they're also thinking of building a toll road and extending 355. Well, that's all right for the counties. I'm willing to give everybody everything. But it amazes me that where we have a massive railroad system already in place, if you stand on any high-rise building, it looks like this, like an octopus. We have all of the rails there, and we can provide as much jobs and construction jobs and operation jobs as the road builders do by employing a mass transit system. Now, the reason they have it in Europe, and I've said this many, many times, is they have a high gas tax. And the railroads are built by the national government. And they use that gas tax money to build railroads. And that's what we've got to do. I'm not saying we should raise the gas tax. I'm saying we should get some federal aid or state aid, or maybe raise the gas tax, some type of funding to have a transportation system. Then we can start limiting automobile access to the center core, like they do in London. London has a tremendous train system. They can limit the access by the automobile to the center core. The other thing we have to figure out is how are we going to move people around the loop? We haven't figured that one out yet. But I'm saying to you, if we really want to handle our population problems, our development of the city, either in Chicago or on a regional basis, we've got to develop this transportation system so that people will use the trains and not necessarily use their automobile. Now, speaking of trains and speaking of the CTA, we're having trouble with the CTA. Some people have said to me, well, let's go to a private system again. I say to me, what? What happened in the 40s and the 50s with the traction system? We used to have two private companies. They went broke. They went bankrupt in the city of Chicago. But see, people forget that. They don't have a memory. And what we have to do is we have to figure out a balance between the CTA and between Metra. And I'm hopeful that the governor appoints this new planning board. And I'm already putting my application in because I'm interested in this. I have no self-interest. I'm interested in this transportation problem. I think this is really the key that will make this city work. So we've got to have more building on a reasonable basis. I think with the new zoning ordinance and with the limitations that we're putting on, there are some categories that have height limitations. We've done an awful lot. We have a central core. We saved the Gold Coast in '78 with the help of Phil Wary and some of the people from the North Dearborn Association. We downzoned the whole area. We put a height limitation, saved all of the brownstones. We're working with people like David Bauman to preserve as much as we can in the way of architecture. But I've said to David many, many times, you're going to have to reach into your coffers, or somebody is, because what do you do when you preserve a building and the owner doesn't want to keep it up? Preservation is fine if the owners are willing to spend money keeping the facades up and keep you getting nervous. Questions? That was an abrupt ending.
I have to go up here, Alderman, and ask that. You're not limited by just 42nd Ward. Clearly, now you could ask national or international questions as well. 42nd Ward is a very cosmopolitan place.
I'm Joyce Saxon, as you know, Bert. I'm on the board of City Club. There was a lot of talk in the news about the remaining residents of Cabrini Green, and this is probably a Walter Burnett question, but I don't see him here, suing to stay at Cabrini Green. What's happened? It kind of dropped off the radar screen.
Well, what happened was, well, that is another topic I could have talked an hour about. Another big issue in this town is affordable housing. And we're providing for that in the zoning ordinance, in which we give the developers bonuses if they provide affordable housing. It's my hope that if they do build affordable housing, they'll combine it with the regular development so that we don't have a differentiation. We don't have a differentiation of services and quality. Cabrini Green is slowly being dismantled, and lower income housing is being built. It is not, I don't have direct supervision over that anymore. If you want to know what's going on, you'd have to ask Jesse White and Walter Burnett. I know that the area is being improved for some people. What's probably happening to the people who are poor and lack economic power, they're probably moving to other parts of the city, and I don't know where that housing is. If you want to know what happened to Cabrini Green, I place it right in the lap of the federal government. The federal government just walked away from it. And it has nothing to do with partisanship. I remember going to Washington and having an actual drawn-out argument with Henry Cisneros, with Jesse White in the room, who said to me, "How can you talk to a secretary this way?" I says, "How can you talk to the alderman this way?" They just plain walked away from it. They didn't maintain it. In fact, I thought it was a very laudable project at one time, because as a young person, when I first came to Chicago, and I lived on the near north side, and I worked at Montgomery Ward, we used to walk down the street, and it was mixed living. There were Caucasian, Afro-American, every ethnic group living in Cabrini Green, and it was in very, very good shape. Yes, sir.
Okay. My name is Mike Ralowski. I'm an attorney. I'm a member of the City Club. My question is, how do you resolve the rights of the current condo owners on Delaware and Rush and the 10 developments that have been proposed for within a couple blocks of that area?
I'm not going to talk to you about Fourth Press. I told you that before. I would say that all of the parcels around that area are downzoned. They're passed already.
Okay.
That's how I resolved it. Now, if you have if you represent somebody that's taking a loss in property value, you should file a lawsuit. This is your chance. Earn a good fee. I'll tell you what, you're going to lose because of the lake. You're going to lose because of the Lake Tahoe case, which says the Supreme Court. I'm the first one to say that the Supreme Court didn't understand the issue. That's beside the point. But the Supreme Court has said that you do not have a taking unless you completely exhaust economic use as a result of government action. So I think you're out. But I know you weren't asking that on behalf of that kind of a person. Yes, Joe?
Joel Cohen, CEO, Richard Hoffman Corporation, City Club member. No one has mentioned yet that you're now committeeman of the 42nd Ward. Congratulations.
Well, this is a nonpartisan thing, so I don't want to say.
Okay.
People think that I'm espousing democratic philosophy and propaganda.
My question is, what do you see as the future of some of the big box users, retail users who have been attempting to come into Chicago, the IKEAs, the Walmarts?
Here we go. We're having issues now where communities are asking zoning to solve other problems. We had the Walmart issue. If anybody has a problem with labor relations or with price regulations or with antitrust regulations. It's the fault of this national administration for not using the administrative agencies of the national government to solve those problems. If there's a labor problem where Walmart, for example, won't negotiate with labor, then the NLRB should step in. If they're not charging appropriate prices, what about the Robinson-Patman Act? If they're getting too large, then what about antitrust? See, you can say whatever you want about Franklin D. Roosevelt. Franklin D. Roosevelt and George Landis set up a system of administrative agencies which were not to be taken over by industry or by the industry that they regulated. They were supposed to be objective in regulating these various aspects of society. The ICC, we wouldn't be having trouble with our airlines today if we had left the CAB in place. I remember in law school, we used to spend 6 months writing a brief on an entry problem for an airline. In other words, you couldn't enter the field unless you were able to show necessity and convenience. That was true of the ICC. Now, in this national administration, they've practically gotten rid of all of the jurisdictional aspects of these agencies. Do you think we would be having trouble with our corporations if the Securities and Exchange Commission had done its job? Now, this is all a part of a philosophy of no government interference. Little government, we don't need the government. Well, we're finding out now, in these various issues that are arising, the government should have been there to act as the sheriff.